All right. Hey, parents, welcome to our Nature Wednesdays where we talk all things nature. We're getting kids outside, we're helping them learn, we're having a ton of fun. And today we're talking about resilience. So, as you guys well know, all kids need resilience, but especially our smart and gifted kids, they don't necessarily practice resilience as much as a lot of other kids do, and they need those opportunities and they need to be set up. They need to be set up in a way where they can learn resilience, have a good time, and not be afraid to take these risks. And you guys, this is what Jason Kolaczkowski, which I believe I said it correctly. This is part of what he does. So by day, he's an analyst and works with healthcare organizations. And by evening and weekends, he is a super fun dad that gets his kids outside. He's an outdoor instructor, and he has a really cool YouTube channel called Short Guys Beta Works. And we're going to share that link with you guys later so that you can tune in and see a lot of the adventures that he has with his family. But as you guys well know, in Nature Matters Academy, we're all about connecting and we're about developing skills like resilience. And nature is the perfect platform and the perfect environment to do both of those things because you're connecting as a family as you're developing resilience together. And Jason's going to talk to us a little bit about how he does that with his kids and how he does that with Short Guys. So, oh, and we already got a comment. Thank you for joining us, Jason. I'm pretty sure that's from Teresa, who I told you about earlier.
Thank you, Teresa.
Yep. Jason, let me know. Are you ready to share screen?
I believe I am.
Okay.
And I think as any of you who've joined any of the live chats here would realize, we want it to be as much a conversation as anything. So I've certainly built in a lot of time for people to ask questions. You can either jump on so I can hear you, or if you want to type something in the chat, then we'll get those fed to me, and I will give you my best answers, which may not be good enough, but we will try with my best answers. But yeah, absolutely. We want to be talking today about how I approach using nature to help my kids think about risks, and sort of the end game here, because lead with the headline and hold all the suspense, is that they need to be rewarded for risks. And that's a difficult needle to thread because risks by definition come with failure. So how do you structure an environment where risk-taking is conscious rather than just sort of happenstance, and something that you can start to build a set of skills, not just resilience, which is actually what we're going to talk about mostly, but also just the process of thinking about analyzing risks. How many parents here have been having to deal with thinking about risk over the last 18 months? I mean, you always do as a parent, but it started with when we didn't know anything about the pandemic or anything about the virus. We're washing down groceries, and getting the mail out of the mailbox all of a sudden feels risky. And thankfully, we're past those days. But there's always a new set of risks as a new piece of information comes out about this. And so, if there was ever a case study of a season of life where it became self-evident that we're all managing risk all the time, and the way that we can structure thinking about managing risk might be helpful, certainly the last year and a half has been it. And don't we want to equip our kids to have the skills and the capacity to look at the world that way as well? So kind of that's where we're going. And here, the title slide, again, not to bury the headline, it's not supposed to be easy, right? And I'm a serial failure. And maybe that's a strange way for someone to introduce themselves. And then I'll contradict myself here for a minute and see if this is the kind of things that people think about as a failure. I was a 2-sport varsity letterman, and I played on a nationally ranked high school soccer team back when school soccer was still a big deal, as opposed to the club soccer now attached to the professional clubs is now sort of the thing. And then I was a professional golfer. I actually played tournament golf for 2 years. I wasn't quite good enough to make the PGA Tour, but I was making a living. And then I won a graduate fellowship, so I had my graduate school paid for, and I was high school class valedictorian, and so I had a successful sort of trajectory in life, and I own my own business, and I help healthcare organizations get smart about data, which I find to be rewarding and meaningful work. And yet I would say I'm a serial failure. That's because I find places very purposely where failure is a very real outcome, because that's where growth happens. Mm-hmm. And Jenny alluded to it. Part of the risk that we have with smart and gifted kids is they don't experience enough failure. They're rewarded at every turn. And that's not from like some cliched bad parenting, like, we're always praising our kids too much. And back in my day when we could get the leather strap out, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about they're good at stuff. And people naturally migrate to things that they're good at. So a failure. This was my last major climb. This is the Annapurna Massif, which is just off to the left hand of the screen, is an 8,000 meter peak. There are 14 8,000 meter peaks in the world. They're called the 8,000ers. The one just off to the screen to the left is the first one that was ever climbed. It was climbed in 1950 by a French team called Annapurna 1. And those mountains are really hard to climb. But what I was trying to do as we zoom in here was get at this guy, Gangapurna West, 7,140 meters. Or
hey, Jason, hold on just a second. We are still on your screen that has the event with the title slide.
I am. I apologize.
Oh, that's okay.
Thank you for bringing that in. Let me share the correct. See, serial failure. You thought I was kidding. And yet here I am. So stop sharing. And then we'll share the correct. No, I don't want to share a video file. I want to share my screen and the right tab. There we go. This should be better. There we go.
There it is. We got it.
So Annapurna was off to the left. So back up so people can orient. This is the Annapurna Massif. What I was trying to get at was this guy over here, and we'll zoom in, called Gangapurna West at 7,140 meters, which is just under 24,500 feet. That's not quite so high that you're going to be hooking yourself up to oxygen, but it's not far short of it. But the trick about this peak for us is that it is unclimbed. No one has ever stood on the summit. So everything about it is a mystery. And that makes it a lot more interesting from a risk assessment perspective. As we zoom in here, here's the picture from our camp, our 18,000 foot advanced base camp, looking up at the summit there. So you've got, it looks small, but you've got 6,500 feet between the top of that tent and that little summit pyramid up there at the top. We did not make it. Again, serial failure. It is hard to do a first descent unclimbed peak, particularly someone who isn't a professional climber. I just do this stuff. From a hobbyist perspective, I'm very good at it. From a professional perspective, I'm not that great. I'm not that great. There's a chasm between those two groups. But so we went out here. We were a team of 6. We gave it our go. I got injured. That's what turned me around. Someone else got sick. Eventually, having less manpower to haul gear up and down the mountain, we took longer, and then weather started to move in, and eventually that's kind of what turned us around. But I try to do things like this every so often. Push something that's right on the edge of my abilities. And so how can we push the edge of our abilities in ways that isn't going to ask your kids to go climb a 24,000 foot peak where death is a real outcome? That's not what we're talking about today. We're going to bring it close to home, but apply some of the same lessons. Because these guys, this is my brood here. That's Connor with the hat, the wide brim hat there. Cade walking around in the baseball cap. They're twin 6-year-olds. They are gifted. They skipped kindergarten. It looks like they'll be skipping 2nd grade after they just did their first year of school online. And we'll take it from there. We're learning to do this as much as they are. But these guys, I'm not asking to take those kinds of risks right now. I'm not sure I ever want them to take those kinds of risks. I'm not sure what my parents think about me taking these kinds of risks. But what I do want them to do is think about risks and find not only resilience, but also calm, reflection, and sometimes purpose in nature. And I think that nature can provide all of those things.
Yes.
So getting into it a little bit. We were talking about resilience, right? And we talked about just briefly how kids who are smart tend to be good at things and don't have the opportunity to practice failure as much as maybe other kids do. And that usually manifests itself as a form of perfectionism. That perfectionism has been typed. The typology of perfectionism, you can look this up. I'll make sure that all the links get sent to Jenny, who can send it to the group. This is an academic study that was looking at high schoolers in this case. And this was empirically done. It wasn't just sort of an observation study. It was based on, yes, observation, also survey, but also empirical data gathering. And they came up with these mixed adaptive, pervasive, non-perfectionist, and mixed maladaptive types, right? And if you're looking at traditional notions of success, like the high school valedictorian, which is a very traditional notion of success, they find that this mixed adaptive group, and I won't read this to this very small group of parents, but this mixed adaptive group, these are those kids. These are the ones that like me was able to work in an environment that was structured like that. I went to public school, was in the gifted and talented program and the honors programs, but very much in Albuquerque. It wasn't the world's worst school district, but it wasn't the world's best kind of school district. I wasn't going to Bronx Science or Philip Exeter or anything like that. But kids who had those types of success, that's your mixed adaptive. Then you have your non-perfectionist, which is better than the other two, according to the argument in this paper. This pervasive perfectionism or this mixed maladaptive, it's better off to not be achieving, but not have mental anguish, quite realistically, by being non-perfectionist than it is to have this pervasive or this mixed maladaptive response to perfectionism. And they typed out, how much pressure parents are giving their children and all that type of stuff. But that's not really what we're talking about today. It's not about all the things that you can do right or wrong as a parent to make sure that your kids are either not perfectionist or mixed adaptive. The point is that gifted and talented and smart kids are at a higher risk of falling into these really detrimental categories of pervasive perfectionism or mixed maladaptive, because there are so many times where they can, they have the 95 score on the homework assignment when the teacher gives it back to the class and tells everyone, hey, you can do this one again because some of you struggled with it. And so now they're moving from 95 to 100, while the other kid is moving from 55 to 70, right? And so there's just the amount of marginal work that they do to get very little marginal gain is just structured differently in their lives, and it tends to push them into these perfectionist mindsets. So this is part of resilient science, and I know that Jenny's more of an expert on this than I am, but if you want a resilience overview, this particular paper, Resilience in Children, Developmental Perspectives, is a really good meta-analysis. So it's one of those meta studies. So it, by definition, has to go through kind of a lit review of the psychology science behind resilience. And this is a great place to start. So I just want to kind of call that out as a resource for everyone to talk about the factors that play into making resilient children. And I'm going to hone in on some of it because obviously it's an entire academic school of thought. It's more than I can cover in a few minutes, but I'm going to narrow in on a particular set of points here. The short list of common resilience factors in child development. So kids who are able to deal with not only failure, but also, really debilitating socio and socioeconomic ills. Kids who are, in times of food or shelter scarcity, kids who have, parental support that is floating in and out of the picture, all of those sort of very dynamic and very likely to be contributing to poor outcomes. That and your gifted kids. There's been a lot of studies, if you start going down this rabbit hole, that says gifted kids are like everyone else, only more so. That the same things that are going to positively impact, are going to intervene to positively impact a kid who is dealing with food scarcity, are also going to positively impact a gifted kid who is certainly dealing with a different set of problems up on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They're talking about self-actualization and their mental health rather than just, am I cold or am I hungry? But it's the same types of interventions. And I wanted to highlight the ones in blue here. These are the ones that are common for kids in general. The ones in blue, you can all sort of, if you think of a Venn diagram, a multidimensional Venn diagram about all of these different factors, these factor into, they all contribute concretely to the notion of internal locus of control. Internal locus of control meaning that, yes, I know things happen to me in the world, but I also know that I can influence and impact the world around me, which yields a whole plethora of better outcomes across academic, across health, across social and psychological factors. If you feel like there's something that you can do that can impact the world, you are less likely to end up in dire circumstances. A very interesting little study that came out is they basically produced a questionnaire. I think it was relatively short, like 15 or so typographic questions. They were asking people in tornado belt part of the United States, a series of questions that would type them into whether or not they viewed internal or external locus of control. External locus of control being the opposite, right? Where you feel like it's more of the world happens to me than I happen to the world. And the people who don't leave when natural disasters are coming tend to fall drastically disproportionately on external locus of control continuum when you try to type them through a set of survey questions. So that's just one example. You are more likely to get killed as your house gets run over by the tornado because you're there than if you're an internal locus of control person. And that gets into this magic triad of internal locus of control, plays with resilience, plays with risk-taking. One of the interesting factors through all of this is internal locus of control is positively correlated with taking risks. That if you are less likely to take risks, you are actually more likely to tilt towards external locus of control. And the causal direction, as the arrows here are to describe, flows both ways. Of course, we could say that people who are already have internal locus of control are more willing to take risks because they feel like they can mitigate those risks. But it also goes the other way around. People who are willing to take risks have opportunities to learn the habits and the way of thinking that practices internal locus of control. And that's really what we're going to be focusing on. I'm going to come up for air for a minute here, give a chance for people to ask a couple of questions. And if not, I can dive right back into it.
Yeah, you guys, I posted in the comments that type any questions that you may have. And I think great questions to ask Jason are specific questions about your kids, right? And I think that that's a good place to start. So as you start thinking about these things that he's talking about, think about your individual kids and what's the situation that you've gone through, and maybe he has a great suggestion. So when you have that, type it into the chat, and then I'll ask Jason.
So we're going to talk about sort of three things that I've found I need to foster, whether that's foster in the environment or foster in myself, in order to provide an opportunity for my kids to take risk and use it as an opportunity to build internal locus of control, which in turn becomes the mechanism that helps foster this resilience, this ability to deal with failure in a constructive rather than a destructive way. And the first is that you need a language for risk. One of the things that I really like about getting my kids out, and I get my kids out into not situations like a 24,000 foot peak, but I do get them out, like here you see them scrambling, something serious enough that I put a helmet on them. They also rock climb, like, full technical rock climb with ropes, although, they're in a safe environment. I'm top roping them. If they fall, they're just going to dangle on the rope. They're not going to, crash and break an ankle or anything like that. But right. I do purposefully get them into what many parents would consider, wow, that's a pretty risky activity. But one of the things that I like about those activities is that it creates this language that we need to use to discuss risk. And I want to introduce a few key concepts around that and then sort of bring these 2 points to home. The language of risk itself, and then how that risk is applied in the opportunities in the outdoors that my family participates in. So risk managers. We have to talk about this a lot in the outdoors. The outdoors people think about risk the same way that engineers do in risky environments. Engineers who are dealing with highly risky factory jobs, those types of things, who are trying to make sure health and safety issues are being dealt with appropriately. We think about it in the same way. My dad was a nuclear engineer before he retired, and so his entire job was to assess risk around, first it was nuclear power plants and mechanical failure. Is this likely to break a 3-mile island? Then eventually it was human error. Are they likely, the control room staff, likely to go through the safety protocols correctly if there's a fire in the control room? And then eventually, my dad retired in 2008. Eventually it was all about what's the likelihood that someone's going to try and fly a plane into the side of this thing? And so it was all these very ambiguous, hard to answer questions about risk. And so I grew up around an environment where we were thinking and talking about risk every time I asked him about, what are you doing in your job these days? We apply this in the outdoors. We talk about subjective versus objective risk. And not coincidentally, this parallels internal and external locus of control. Now, a subjective risk is a risk that I bring to the environment. And this often has to do with sort of my attention span, my ability to analyze and assess, my own psychological makeup. A classic version of subjective risk, you hear about this in avalanches a lot, is something called the expert halo, where say a bunch of backcountry skiers go out. So they're not at a resort, they're skiing places where no one's doing avalanche mitigation. So part of what you do is you assess the snowpack and you try and figure out, is this a safe place for me to ski or is this not a safe place for me to ski? And one of the things that pops up time and time again when you do have parties caught in an avalanche is you'll usually see a group that's something like, we had 3 relatively new backcountry skiers and 2 super experienced backcountry skiers who were showing us the ropes. And this is how riskier outdoor activities often happens, is you get a mentorship. And so this is not unusual. But one of the common factors that shows up is that the 3 newbies, for lack of a better term, they will defer all of the risk management decisions to the 2 experts. And we call this the expert halo. And that's a subjective risk. That's a psychological presupposition, a bias that I bring to the decision-making process as a new backcountry skier that I don't necessarily have to do. Then there's objective risks. And those are things that the environment brings to us. And in the type of stuff that I do, that is avalanches themselves. That could be one. Rockfall is certainly one. Seracs, if you're climbing through ice fields, a serac is basically just a big block of ice that can fall off as things get melted out. And that's happening more and more to the people, pardon me, as a truck drives by. That's happening more and more to the people who float in my circles as we're seeing global warming's impacts on high peaks and particularly glaciated peaks. Those are all objective risks. And so we think about that. We have conversations. We stop at a point in our climb and we look up at a mountain and we say, what do we think the snowpack's doing? Oh, well, the sun is coming from this direction and it's roughly this warm out. And, this is kind of what we're thinking. That's all objective. And then we say, okay, well, how are you feeling about it? What is your makeup today? What were you thinking about when you were assessing? And now we're trying to get at the subjective risk. And so with our kids, we talk about both the feelings and using, appropriate 6-year-old terms. How are you feeling about this climb? Mm-hmm. Are you feeling like you're in danger versus are you actually in danger? And those are 2 very different things. So we talk about those 2 components. We talk about likelihood and consequence. As parents, we, out of necessity, mostly talk about our kids around the consequence factor of what really is this risk equation. Because when our kids are very little, it's, run over and stop them from jamming the fork into the light socket. The consequence is high. When they get older, we don't say, well, here's the pros and cons around drinking and driving. We just say, don't drink and drive. We jump to uber consequential decisions that clearly have negative outcomes. And that's where we put a lot of time and energy and focus because we often don't have enough time to think about the middle to high probability, low consequence risks. If my kids are on a rock climb and they're on a top rope and they take a fall, and so a fall on the top rope means they might sink 6 inches, not too big a deal. But if those 6 inches are above a ledge and they fall those 6 inches, they could theoretically break a toe or something. That is a lower consequence risk that we have an opportunity to talk about when we say, hey, you want to climb higher than that ledge as quickly as you can, because then if you fall, that ledge can't hurt you anymore. So those are opportunities for us to talk about those different types of risks. Then, of course, there's how we deal with risk. Avoidance, mitigation, transfer, and acceptance. Avoidance means I'm just not going to deal with the risk. I'm not going to get in the car if I've been drinking. That's pure avoidance. And I would recommend it, by the way. Sometimes avoiding risk is the right solution. Mitigation means you're going to try to reduce the risk. And we do this outdoors all the time. This is the primary way that we deal with it. Because the fact that we're out there means that we're usually not avoiding risk. That serac that's hanging over that ice block that's hanging over part of the route, we're going to mitigate the risk by resting off to the side purposefully right before we're going to cross it, then so we can cross it very fast underneath it. So then we can rest again, which is not something that you normally do in a climb. You just sort of keep going. But that is a way to mitigate that risk. I'm going to reduce the amount of time where the likelihood of that serac falling on me is a possibility. And that's a very simple example. We can transfer the risk. The easiest example in regular life for transfer is insurance. This is what we buy insurance for. We say now it's on, State Farm's head if my house burns down, as long as, there isn't any malfeasance. So transfer, right? Can't really do this if you're getting outdoors unless you're asking someone to do the dangerous thing. When we ask the Sherpas to carry all the heavy loads and set all the camps when they go up Everest so that our well-heeled Western climbers can go up after them. That's risk transference. And then acceptance. We're not going to do anything about it. It's just part of life. That's the acceptance. You could think in some ways like getting in a car like this, although we do actually mitigate a lot with airbags and, but maybe you could say, well, we don't have to take trips at all. There's a certain amount of risk that we're willing to take just by getting through life. So having the language so that we can then give opportunities to take risks. And so the opportunities, and here I want to bring it, like I say, closer to home. I'm not asking everyone to go take ridiculous climbs. There's probably not many climbers on this call. But the outdoors creates a continuum where you can mix and match to your skills, your knowledge, and your risk tolerance as a parent, and then bring your kids to that environment. So on this screen, loosely speaking, from left is the higher risk to right, which is the lower risk. So I could go alpine climbing, 24,000 foot peak, well, that's actually high altitude. An alpine climb where you're using ice tools and crampons and all that kind of stuff and going up very vertical rock faces. That's pretty risky. Scrambling, which is the picture you saw earlier with my kid with a helmet on, going with hands and feet, but no ropes. Less risky than alpine climbing. Sometimes more risky than rope climbing, by the way. It depends on the nature of the route. Camping. Camping's risky. You're out there multiple days. It's not, it doesn't feel risky for people who go to the local, KOA, and it feels maybe slightly more risky for someone who's going into the backcountry, but you're out there and you're exposed to all sorts of things, not, bears if you're in Colorado, coyotes, all types of issues. And then there's day hikes, right? Terrain, you've heard me talk about glaciers and seracs, rock fall, then just plain old steep climbing, and then eventually get to like flat lake hikes, right? So you can find a risky terrain that matches, and risky meaning the scientific term, they all have risk. A risky terrain that's going to match your tolerance and your skill set. Isolation. The more people who are out there, the more help is around you, right? So if you're going to be the only family that's out, then you're going to be in a more risky situation because you're going to have to be self-sufficient for whatever that means. You fall, forget, we all worry about our kids, falling and hurting themselves. You fall and break an ankle and can't walk.
Yes.
Now what?
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
If there's the occasional run-in, that's slightly less risky. There's going to be people by. It's just a matter of when. And then, the other extreme of the continuum, you can't find a parking space because it's the popular trailhead and everyone's going to be there. Weather, both heat and cold, because they're immediate and inescapable. If you're going to be doing, bad water down in Death Valley and doing an ultra marathon because you're absolutely insane. I don't know how they do it. It was 130 degrees when they were doing the ultra marathon this year. So heat, cold, going to extreme altitude, those are ever present. So that's the most risky. If you live in Colorado, you are very familiar with afternoon thunderstorms, that the rule is get off peaks before noon so that you don't get struck by lightning. That, comes in and out. Then, of course, there's just plain rain, which can deal with some cold issues, but it's more like slip. If you're going to slip on stuff, it's going to happen more likely in the rain. And then you can get to just sort of cloudy, which is, the threats are there, but nothing really bad's happening. And you have sort of those bluebird days. And then you talk about duration, which I alluded to a little bit talking about camping. If you're going to be out for weeks versus days versus hours versus minutes, you're increasing again, back to subjective and objective hazards, you're increasing the amount of time that you're in an objectively hazardous environment by being out for a longer period of time. One of the key mitigation strategies is to be out there less time. So you don't have to take your kids out rock climbing with ropes. You don't have to go high altitude climbing. You don't have to live in Colorado and do the 14ers. You can find things where there is risk involved and where you can have conversations about, what do you think we should do if mom was to fall down and hurt herself here, or if dad was to fall down and hurt themselves here? And you can do it in a non-threatening way. You can do it as a hypothetical sort of mental process and get them engaged in the conversation. And then they need rewards. You don't want all the risks to show up as bad outcomes, right? So what you want is to find things where you're balancing short and long-term goals. the short-term goal might be to get to the top of this rock, as in this case, in this photo, right? We wanted to, this is observatory rock. We wanted to climb to the top of it. We did, we climbed to the top of it. But for them, climbing to the top of observatory rock is part of a larger progression of getting skills for something that they care about. They happen to really like rock climbing. I'm not that great a rock climber. I prefer snow and ice. They love rock. They're already almost as good as me, but they want to get better. So for them, this is part of a progression. So when they get to the top of observatory rock, they're able to say, I feel good about myself, but there's more to do, which takes you away from that perfectionism. But you've also had that reward, endorphin hit of an accomplishment. On the other side, if we had not been successful, we are now able to say, not that we had a goal, climb observatory rock, we didn't get it, and now I feel bad. Because it was a step on a path to a larger outcome, this journey of being a better rock climber for them, we were able to look at failure as a success and say, well, we didn't get to the top of observatory rock, but we discovered some new things, like this is the hard move for us, or once it got up to 5/8 climbing, that was too hard. So now we know what to go practice, and they can immediately recast that failure into a stepping stone for progress. So it's important to have immediate, those endorphin opportunities of being immediately successful, but you can't mitigate against failure and the deflating aspects of that if you don't have a long-term goal to tie it to. So you really need both. Which gets to the ongoing versus finite. Competition, I have twin boys, they compete with each other all the time, more so than I would like. And I would like them to compete with themselves. So when I have, and this happens almost every time we go out, well, I got to the top first, didn't I, Dad? Well, I don't know, did you get to the top as fast as you wanted to go? Or I climbed that route faster than I did. Yeah, but then my brother. Yeah, but your brother got to the top too. And how do you feel like you did? And so I want to redirect the conversation internally and say, okay, are you progressing? This gets back to that short and long-term goal. Are you progressing?
Right.
Not did you do better than your brother? Which hopefully fosters intrinsic motivation. I know for this group, I probably don't need to talk about intrinsic versus extrinsic, but let's just say intrinsic, it has longevity and extrinsic doesn't. And so we want to make sure that we're coupling to an intrinsic desire for improvement rather than an extrinsic desire to get to the top before my brother, which then gets into that achievement component, which is, I want everything to be almost. That there isn't an end, because guess what? This is life, right? Like, forget their ability to rock climb, forget their ability to do the hard math. Just as a human being with a soul and who cares about others, I want to be improving myself all the time. My ability to deal with my own mental health during the time of pandemic, my ability to be a better parent. I want to always be thinking I'm a work in progress. And I want my kids to always be thinking that they're a work in progress too.
Yes.
And so that gives, these opportunities give them that reward structure to cast success as in a step forward as progress, because as ironic as it is for me to say on the back of this conversation, there is no summit. There's never any summit. There's just another step. And so getting people into the outdoors, where you go camping or you go for a hike to the lake, find a lake that's hard for you to get to. You've never done a 5-mile hike round trip before. The most you've ever done is 3. Choose the 5-mile hike. Right. You might not get there. You never camp for 3 days. You've only done 2. Try and camp for 3 days. You'd be amazed how much harder it is to do 2 overnights than it is to do 1. Those are the little things that we can do to get almost done as opposed to done, to have a next step that we can take. And so that we can model the way for our kids, but that we can also plop our kids into the middle of that type of, character construction, being conscious of our own character construction in a ways that will allow us to view failure and recast it as success, which is sort of the definition of resilience.
Yes, absolutely. Just so you know, my boys are 4 years apart. I mean, the youngest one is 4 years old, and they're constantly competing and who gets to the top of the rock first and so I don't know if that makes you feel better, but we have the same problem. And I am very much like you. That's I think team sports are great. My son plays soccer. Both of them play soccer. But there's something about outdoor recreation, outdoor sports, where they're constantly competing against themselves. And it's just, them doing it one bit better than they did before. Jason, do you have time for a little question? Because we have people here.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Right. So one of our moms says, I feel nervous letting my autistic and ADHD kid take risks. How should I go about this with him? So autistic and ADHD, I mean, that can be.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts there?
My general, my kids fall a little bit, not on the autistic spectrum, but my kids fall a little bit on the ADHD spectrum, not dramatically. So I can only relate to this a little bit. So I guess the first way I would answer it is the cop-out answer, but then I'll give you, my real honest opinion follow-up answer. Certainly is talk to your mental health professionals about the best mechanisms for creating the environments to do this. That's the, I think the real advice. The opinionated advice is take it in bite-sized chunks. There's this rule of thumb that I have, and I know it's not particularly helpful because it's all these subjective terms, but growth happens in the place between capability and incapability. Like, I don't want to do something that I know I'm capable of as a growth opportunity, because if I know if success is almost 100% likely, I'm not really going to grow. On the other end of the continuum, if it's something I know I can't do, then depending on the situation, particularly the types of stuff that I do, and maybe a kid who's at risk in nature, like your child, the consequences could be higher than you're willing to tolerate. So what you want to do is find that little next step. Can I get them to, rather than go scrambling, can I get them to climb to a top of a rock? Because that only requires their focus and attention for 30 seconds, or depending on where your child is. Give them those incremental bite-sized opportunities and find ways for you to, by proxy, measure it. How long was my kid focused on that? A minute and a half. Okay, next time I'm going to do another minute and a half. If I feel like my child's got it, then maybe next time I look for a 2-minute interval that requires them to be focused. I don't know if that really gets at your answer, because individual circumstances and your child's particular way that they might manifest some of their challenges, I'm not aware of. So the sort of best general advice is the same way that I proceed to push my climbing. I didn't go to a 24,000 attempt at a first ascent in the Himalaya first. I started climbing 14ers, and then they got comparatively easy for me. And so then I tried 13ers. And why are 13ers harder than 14ers? Because no one's there. And so then I was isolated. And then I tried to do technical climbing, and I learned to do that. And then I tried to do technical climbing, not just at the local, rock wall near the city, but out in the Alpine, where again, the risk gets higher because no one's there and there's more variables. And then it was high altitude, and I went to Ecuador, and can I do that? And does my body adapt and acclimate well? And the answer was yes. And so then can I combine technical climbing and high altitude? So then I went to Denali. And it's like, okay, well then I've done a 3-week expedition where I've combined all that. I'm going to go big. And then I went for a first ascent in the Himalaya. So it's a loose analogy at best, but I think it applies, that it's the old eat the elephant one bite at a time. I don't know who eats elephants. Yeah. It seems inhumane, but
no, it seems it's wrong. But you're exactly right. You have to build skill one step at a time. And when you have a kid, because my kids are very much ADHD as well as sensory processing disorder. And there are things that we build, just like you're talking about, Jason. We give them little pieces with mountain biking, and then we take them on a harder trail. But there's also certain things that I just don't do at this stage because I know that they will hurt themselves. We have a friend that camps near a cliff, and he takes his kids. And I'm like, if my kids were there, they would both just walk straight off that thing.
Yep.
And so, I think you're exactly right. It's about building skill, but also, like you mentioned earlier, just setting the stage with risk management. And there are certain places you go and certain places you don't go until you're ready.
Great example for my kids. So my kids are really into rock climbing. My kids want to do something that's called multi-pitch. So there's single pitch and multi-pitch.
Yes.
I'll legal here just for a second. I know you know, Jenny, because you're a climber.
Yeah, no, go. This is great.
But single pitch means you go up to usually some sort of very solid anchor. Sometimes it's bolted literally into the rock, depending on the type of climbing you're doing. Otherwise, it's a tree or a massive boulder. So you got a very solid thing that you create an anchor on the top of. You go up once, you come down. Multi-pitch is you go up, and I need to back up so people can see me. You go up, and then everyone else in your party goes up, and then you go up and you do another one, and everyone comes up, and then you go up and do another one, and another one comes up, depending on how many pitches you're doing. A pitch is each time up. My kids want a multi-pitch. I'm not letting them do that yet, because when I go up, and then they come up, and then I go up again, they have to stay anchored onto a vertical face for 20 minutes while I go up. And they are not yet capable of not being distracted, of not getting antsy, of not, getting in their mom's way who's belaying me. It's unsafe for them and it's unsafe for me. And so to your point, Jenny, you have to know your own kids a little bit, and you want to put them in circumstances that is that bite-sized chunk. So.
Yeah, I love that bite-sized analogy. I think that's great. We have another question for you. So what are your strategies for getting polar opposite siblings into those risky adventures together? My oldest gets anxiety, shuts down, and is really hard on himself if he's not successful right off the bat. And just as successful as his little brother. And the youngest dives in, no problem.
So my kids have gotten less. They're starting to converge, but my kids started divergent in the way that they approached things that they perceived as risky. Whether it was risky or not is almost irrelevant. It's do they perceive it as risky? And Connor likes to sit back and watch and assess and think and observe, and he's analyzing. Cade jumps in, just like, throw me at it. I'm going to go. and particularly with how they started rock climbing, this was the most extreme example of these two different personalities. And so part of what I did was find that balance point between letting them be comfortable enough to approach risk problems. And I mean that again in the scientific term, doing something that has risk to it. Approach risk problems in a way that allows them to be grounded in their own natural proclivities and nudge them a little bit. It's, again, that sort of balance point between how far do you push a kid out of their comfort zone. So we would let Cade dive in because he wants to dive in. And that would let Connor sit back and watch and observe and assess. And so if you have a child who's got high anxiety and a dive-in kid, that might be an opportunity for to your high anxiety kid to say, well, we'll let your brother be the guinea pig here. It's perfect. It's perfectly safe, but it allows them to have an object lesson to look at. Yeah. And reduce, it's the old exposure analogy, right? This is, you have to give your kids exposure to stressors in order for it to become not stressful. This is exactly what the NASA astronauts did. It was new. It was unique to aerospace when we did the Mercury and Gemini and Apollo programs, that they tried to pre-think the entire journey and expose the astronauts to every single type of stressor beforehand. Before they were just test pilots, they just threw them in the plane. You throw them in the plane and you let their experience take over. For the astronaut program, they wanted them to experience all the stresses so that when those stresses happened in their real life, they would already have that adaptive, they'll have adapted to the stimulus so that they're more likely to do what they're supposed to do rather than get into a panic. So I would say it's the same sort of thing. Like, you want to find a way for your kids to get adaptively exposed to risk. And maybe for your high anxiety kid, it's just getting them to the base of the climb or getting them to the base of the rock or getting them to the campsite and drive them out to the campsite. This is where we're going to camp next weekend. We're not this weekend. Let's walk around. Let's hang out for half an hour. Whatever you can do to pre-expose them to the exact circumstance that you're going to put them in will reduce that anxiety. And then meanwhile, let your other kid dive in.
I love it. It goes back to your bite-sized idea, right? It's just you're going even pre-trip. You're doing these bite-sized to get there. Yeah, that's great. So I have another one for you. So my youngest son at 3.5 started biking, and a month later we put him on a mountain bike trail, and he did amazingly. I was shocked, but again, gifted kids, right? He can mountain bike at 3.5, and at almost 5, he still can't put on his own shoes. So
my kids still don't have laces.
Yeah. Oh no. Oh yes. That's like way beyond what we can handle. So what happens to us is we get him on, he loves it, then he falls and he gets hurt. And then once he's hurt, it's, the big emotions come up, and we're working on focusing on the fun that he has because he loves doing it. But then it's so easy for him to focus on the negative of when he gets hurt, and us trying to rewire his brain. Have you had any experiences with that with your kids?
Yes. And it gets back to, again, the adapt. It's almost literally the same answer as the adaptive stressor. It's just you have to realize that you have to back up, and that's a parental consciousness of realizing where your kid is in their mental progression. So, Kate, we have a homemade bouldering. Bouldering is rock climbing without ropes. It's just not tall enough that if you take a fall, it might not feel good, but you're not going to get hurt. So we have an indoor bouldering wall at our house, and Cade was doing a climb, and he'd never really been on top rope outside. He's never really taken a fall. He's our go for it kid. He really went for a move. It's called a dynamic move, where you basically have to jump off of one thing to catch the other one. And he got part of it and he missed it. But because he got part of it, his feet came forward, which threw his head backwards. So he landed hard kind of on his upper back, and he knocked the wind out of himself. Yeah. And that's scary. I remember when I got the wind knocked out of me as a little kid, the first time I couldn't exhale. I mean, if you remember, you just go, all you can do is inhale because your lungs are literally empty.
It's still really hard as an adult. It's still scary. So, yeah.
He's really scared. And so that route, he wouldn't get back on. So it was about, okay, Cade, just do the first hold. His feet are still on the ground, basically. Do that. Then do 2 holds. Now I'm going to hold you. You will feel my hands on your waist. I'm not going to help you, but I'm going to be there. And then he would climb a little more. And now I'm going to just put my thumbs on you. You're going to feel my thumbs, Cade. That's not enough for me to grab you. But if you fall, I can get you. Here, try it.
Right.
Let go. See, I can still grab you. And so we progressively got back to the point where he could climb that route without dad behind him. So for gifted kids, I fall into this. This is a me problem. This is not a my kid problem. This is a me problem. It is very easy for me to take these very advanced kids and say, you had a setback that you're perceiving as a barrier to you. And I know it's not. I know you can do it. I have 45 years of life experience to your 6 years of life experience. I know you can do it. And so I have this very strong urge to say, get up, you can do it. Yeah. And sometimes that's the right answer, but more often the right answer is their perception is their reality, just like my perception is mine. And so I need to ratchet down the starting point. So maybe with the mountain biking kid, it's now you go back into that adaptive stimulus again, and you say, okay, we're just going to put you on the mountain bike in the driveway. We're going to put you on the mountain bike in the parking lot. We're going to put you on the mountain bike, whatever it is to reduce some of the variables, keep the mountain bike, get rid of some of the other variables, or get them back on a trail, but just on their old, smaller BMX bike or whatever it is. Look, you can do it on this. Find a way to reduce the stress tension by removing some of the stressing variables and let your kid recede some so that they can build back up. And I wrestle with that because I know you can do it. I know, just get back on the bike. And no, that's not where they're at.
Yeah. We found that we have to let him ride around the parking lot before we get on the trail. And we have to do that enough to where he gets comfortable again and then go out in the trail. It's really interesting, but it's, you live and you learn. And I think you're exactly right. You just got to rewind and start back at the beginning and those steps they go faster each time to build them back up.
Yes.
Yeah. So the mom who mentioned her ADHD and autistic kiddo, she has another comment here. She said,
sure.
Yes, I was told my child had the highest impulsivity they saw. So I hyper focus on that with excess worry and also not remembering what consequences he would have learned to be safe. So I think that goes back to just like you mentioned earlier in terms of what do you know for them as a person, where do you know is a good place to start? And then just taking those small steps.
Yeah. And I think that comment, not that you need my kudos, but kudos on your self-awareness. I think you just brought your question and our last point together, that it's kind of harder to divorce your kids' risk analysis, risk-taking behavior, and the resilience that comes with it from your own parental psychology. Yeah. And so you as a parent have to be aware of both psychologies and try to be aware of both psychologies. And so try and figure out, this gets back to that probability times consequence. one of the things that they teach climbers to do when they're in really scary situations, you heard me allude to it before, so you've already heard this, but I'm gonna underline it. I'm gonna highlight it. When I'm on a climb that's pushing my limit, not for my kids, you are trained to deal with fear by asking yourself the question that you heard me say before. I feel like I am in danger. So I first validate that. I go, yes, I feel I am scared. I validate the feeling. Then I ask the question, is that because I am actually in danger? Or is that because it is unnatural to be dangling from the rope on the side of a cliff? Right? And those are two different things, right? And so as your parental reflex around your child's potential consequences, a good habit to get into, to start training your own behavioral intervention, is to acknowledge the fear. I am scared that my child is doing this thing right now. Then ask yourself honor it, sit in it. If you need to place it in your body, because that will force you to focus on it. This is another cognitive behavioral therapy tool. You can say, I'm afraid. I feel it in my stomach. It feels empty as a pit. That forces you to focus on the fear for the minute and acknowledge its existence. Then you are now free to move it from your subconscious reptilian brain to the front of your brain and now ask objective questions about it and say, okay, am I afraid because my kid is really in danger? Or is it because I am uncomfortable? And start to assess it. Like, what is the danger that I'm afraid of? I'm afraid that if they fall, they will get hurt. Yes, that is real if they are 8 feet up on a boulder. It is not real if they're 1.5 feet.
Yeah.
And so ask yourself the objective question once you've acknowledged the human subjective part of your character.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love kind of taking those moments. I've been doing with myself that with myself more and more often recently. It's like, I feel this, I feel it here. And is this real? Or, where is that level? And so I think that's great. And practicing it with your kids. And here's another thing, like, it's our job as parents to teach our kids and to give them these tools to be able to mitigate these types of issues as they get older. And so doing it out loud with them teaches them this sort of practice to do when mom and dad aren't around. So Jason, thank you for this. This has been great. Is there anything that you would want to leave us with?
I guess the only thing is, if you do happen to stumble upon the YouTube page, my ending tagline is always the same: get more out of the big outside. I think part of what I can thank Angelique Stedman brought Dr. Jenny and myself together with the original introduction. I can thank her for that. Part of what I think draws me to what you all are doing in this group is that acknowledgement that nature as a laboratory, as a classroom. And the only thing that I know I'm bringing an almost sort of athletic bent to it. The only thing that I would say about that is, don't limit yourself to thinking about nature as just an exercise for your brain. I don't think anyone that has said anything today is at risk of doing that, but just as a general encouragement that it's, psychological, spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical. And that's what I like so much about it. So not every outing, I don't want to pull work away from Jenny, but not every outing needs to be curricular. Yep. Just like not every outing that we do should be athletic. Sometimes it is about naming the flowers and understanding what the biome in our local nature preserve is about. We have to do that too. So let's just make sure we get the yin and the yang, and then you end up with those well-rounded kids, and it works like magic. It's that easy.
Yeah. And you know what? A lot of times the kids dictate, right?
Oh,
you
yes.
go out with this objective to either like hike somewhere and you don't get anywhere because you end up spending the whole time looking at a flower, or you go out with the objective to study flowers and you end up hiking the whole time. So yeah, a lot of times we dictate. We're not always in charge like we think we are.
Yes, parents teach you to move from that internal locus control to that external locus of control. It's called our offspring.
Yep. That's great. Well, Jason, thank you so much for being here with us today. We already have multiple thank yous in the chat. And Diana, who has the autistic ADHD impulsive son, she says, wow, thanks. That makes so much sense. And we have another one who says, thank you again. This was so insightful. So thank you so much, Jason. And we'll be sharing this video in the group and outside of the group, if that's okay with you. So
It is absolutely okay. Anything that I said, I'm sure is worth sharing to everybody.
Absolutely. Of course.
No, but please, absolutely. Anyone who, if you found a nugget here, certainly pass it on. This is all about a community helping each other. This parenting gig is hard enough.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. We need a village. So you guys go to YouTube, look up Short Guys Beta Works, subscribe to his channel, and you're going to see a lot of cool adventures. All right. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.